I don't mean that a piece of music has to be pleasing, has to be nice to listen to. Sometimes music has to be really annoying, but there has to be a sense why you do it, and there has to be a reward for it. Sometimes you need to put the audience in that mood so that you can tell your story, you can bring your own vision to that. So it doesn't have to be pleasing, but it has to have a purpose why you do that. And not all the music has to be nice. My music sometimes is really annoying, but there has to be a purpose why you do that. If you want to portray the horrors of a war, you obviously you are not going to have Kenny G playing saxophone. But
Actually, that connects to something. I was talking recently with a few composers as well about this. And when I go to contemporary music concerts, I try to listen for the discourse of the music, regardless of the aesthetic. I'm trying to listen and trying to understand what is the discourse, where is this taking me, what is the message? You know, it's like a lecture. You're giving a lecture. What is the message you want to convey? What do you want them to understand of all these words? So with music, I try to also understand that. What are they trying to tell me? And one of the things, you know, I mean, with several composers, I talk about that. A problem of contemporary music sometimes is not, for me personally, it's not about the language. Actually, I'm very open to different languages. I've conducted many different languages. I'm happy to do different things. But what I find actually the hardest is to find music that has a discourse that is taking me somewhere. I want to have an idea of what is the connection between those sounds. Mm-hmm. You know, why are you putting this sound next to the other sound in this particular duration or vertically connected to another sound? I mean, why are you doing that? It has to take me somewhere, right? There has to be a reason why you're doing that.
Welcome to Language and Culture with Dr. J. This episode explores music as a pan-national and fundamental form of communication. My guests today are the conductor, Dr. Mercedes Días Garcia, and the composer, Juan José Colomer. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
With this interview, I would like to focus in on music as a form of communication that has evolved alongside the development of languages and forms of verbal communication. There are many theories about whether people started to communicate first through language and then through music, or the other way around, or whether music and languages evolved alongside each other. Then I would like to know how you, as musicians, communicate with each other on a practical and on an artistic level. But also, how do you communicate with your audience, both expert and non-expert audiences? And finally, I would like to explore the idea of communication from the perspective of a composer and from that of a conductor. There's a different accent on each role, and each comes with a different challenge. So we'll get to all these lines of questioning, but before we do so, I would like to bring you as musicians a little closer to my listeners. Mercedes, you began your musical career as an oboist and as a pianist, and later moved on to becoming a conductor. You are from Spain, but spent 10 years in the US and are now living and working in Hamburg, Germany. You have conducted orchestras all over the world, from North and South America to Europe. You have taken part in international music festivals such as the MIMO in Sao Paulo in Brazil and the National Music Festival in the US. You are currently the conductor of Sinfonietta. I had the pleasure of attending not only the performance of Sinfonietta at the Elbphilharmonie, but of watching you work with the musicians and observing your rehearsals for the concert. Juan, you are a Spanish composer from Valencia who spent over 30 years in the US as a film composer, but also working with, for example, the Los Angeles Philharmonic or the San Francisco Symphony, to name only two of many. You are a citizen of both the United States of America and of Spain, but you recently changed your residence from LA to Madrid. You are a great friend of Plácido Domingo, with whom you have worked on many wonderful projects. Some of your most recognized works include Raíces as a symphonic work, or Añoranzas for harp, Or the ballet you composed to bring to life the tableaus of the Spanish painter Joaquín Sorolla. Or the opera you composed about the life of Pablo Picasso. Some of my favorites include your Ave Maria and your piece for cello and piano called Dissipated Realities, and your newest composition that had its premiere at the El Philharmonie, a piece entitled Agony and Ecstasy of a Sentient Machine. It is such a pleasure to be able to conduct this interview with two such accomplished and exciting contemporary musicians. So let's dive right in, shall we?
Yes.
Okay. So music has existed since the Paleolithic period for some 2.5 million years. But people didn't start playing together until later. In ancient Greece, around the 6th century before Christ, there was a type of orchestra, but it was used for expression through dance and not through musical instruments. Scholars believe a Neanderthal flute to have been the first instrument played some 55,000 years ago. What we identify as today's symphonies, however, came about much later in the 1700s as part of overtures for opera and so on. As far as language is concerned, most scholars agree that even though we know that humans communicated already before, the first identifiable languages are probably Sumerian, Akkadian, and the Egyptian hieroglyphs, which have all three died out, but were used in about 2000 BC, which was about 4,000 to 4,500 years ago. And interestingly, today, most of the world's population uses a mere 23 languages, even though some 7,100 languages exist across the globe. So Mercedes and Juan, how does music speak? Tell us, please, about its many tongues.
Well, to me, the idea of music, it works so well because even though it might be a contradiction, music is abstract. So in that sense, music is not telling you, for instance, when somebody asks you, what is this music about? It's not like a guy walks into a bar and then the bartender tells you. There is not a specific narrative to the music. It's an abstract thing that addresses directly a specific part that is not addressed in language, which is emotional, or just goes to some sense of reality that is not concretely expressed with words. So that is why music is so appeals to so many people, because you don't need to know the language. It just appeals to that part that makes you feel a little more sad, or a little more with more empathy. So it's not very well defined what appeals to it. It's a mix of emotions and a mixture of intellectual, mixture of human nature qualities. So that's why, to me, music has the ability of being so powerful. So being said that, I mean, it's also true that some music might not communicate to anybody, because even though music appeals is an universal language, it also depends on your cultural background. For instance, some music from the Middle East might not have a huge impact on us and Europeans as, for instance, for them. So in that sense, there is also a cultural element that makes it associate certain sounds, certain phrases to our emotions. So I'm not sure if I've been clear, but definitely my point is it's an abstract way of communicating that is complementary to words.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that actually talking further about that even the scale, which in the Western culture we consider that quasi-natural, it's not, right? I mean, we know it's just construction. In fact, in other cultures, they have completely different scales and different sounds, and the conception of dissonance is also different. Even the idea of music is very different across the cultures. You know, if you listen to the Quran, a recitation of the Quran, for me it sounds like music. It's beautiful. It's very, very beautiful. However, they don't consider that music. That is not a part of what they consider music. And I was also listening to the Maoris, I think, in New Zealand. And they have also a way of communicating, an expression which they call music, that for us it's so foreign to us that it doesn't sound maybe like music or what we think of music. So, even across cultures, the concept, not only the language, the scales, the fundamentals of music are different, but also the concepts of music. So, it's universal, but the ways in which it's presented is very particular to each culture as well.
Very interesting. Do you think that we could at least compare the scales to the different alphabets, the different ways of writing?
Yes and no, actually, because the scales are based on a natural, they are not natural because they are constructions, but they are based actually on the overtones of a sound.
Yeah, the harmonics, very much, yeah.
The harmonics, yeah. So while the alphabet is purely a construction, right? So in that sense is different.
But how they communicate, right? So the alphabet is our way of noting down, of writing down what we want to say. And the scale is the musician's way of communicating the music, right? The emotion or this aspect of communication, perhaps.
Right. Yeah. It will be like the building blocks, we could say.
Of that, right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because what you're saying, for example, with the reading of the Quran, or for example, for me, reading Proust in French is...
The music of the poetry itself is a music. The declamation of the poetry could be some type of music.
Absolutely. And also what you were saying with this conveyance of emotion and of this universal feeling, we have that through poetry, I think, as well. And what I was saying with Proust, when I read Proust, I actually I feel like I hear a music even. There's a music that is created through his words, through the feelings he elicits, the emotions he elicits, the way he puts his words together, etc. So maybe there is a way to enjoy Czech poetry even if we don't speak Czech, or enjoying the sound of a certain work, also spoken work in a foreign language. From the musical point of view, do you think that's how musicians from various parts of the world approach then other cultures' music? For example, when you're both Spanish and you're both very familiar with the US, so that's the Western world. When you, for example, consider Eastern music, for example, or African music, do you approach it as a foreign language?
To me, unfortunately, I do, because, and I say unfortunately because I would like to be more knowledgeable about it, but I haven't studied it too much. So to me, I would like to know more about it, but it sounds a little foreign to me in the sense that I feel like a stranger. If I want to incorporate that, I would say that it's just, maybe it's also a cultural thing that I think that I'm appropriating things that are not mine. But at the same time, I would like to use it with the respect that it deserves. But in the sense that you were saying, yes, it is like a foreign language to me that somehow I can relate to, because I'm also a musician. But I'm a musician in a different field, if you... a matter of speak, yes.
For me, actually, it's a little bit different. I of course, it's a foreign language as well, because I didn't study that. However, I remember the first times I listened to music from Pakistan, or Indian music, or music from different African countries. And actually, it touches. I think there is something really connected. It's music that, in my opinion, that is born out of a very strong connection to the self, in a way, and I feel that connection. So even if I don't understand what scales they are using, I don't understand what kind of rhythms, there is a lot of complexity. Even if I don't understand that, actually, it feels, some of that music has felt very close to me.
So as musicians, you speak the common language of music, and then you go into the different, let's call them dialects of it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Possibly. So, André Gide once said, "To read a writer is for me not merely to get an idea of what he says, but to go off with him and travel in his company." And the same is true for music, I think. So, Juan, how do you speak as a composer? How do you approach a new project? And Mercedes, how do you bring it all together? Because the conductor has to understand the composer, has to understand the music, has to understand the musicians, and has to make sure the so-called message is communicated to the public. And this is also an enormous task, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's completely different for every piece. Sometimes when I have to compose a piece, I usually take a few, I don't know how many days I have, but usually days or maybe weeks. It depends how far away is the deadline. But I like to just put it in the back of my mind and just let the brain in the back start processing without even giving attention. But but then at that point, I need some kind of a trigger, something that really makes my brain say like, yes, this could work. Sometimes it's just a specific tone of an instrument. Sometimes it's the idea of two clashing chords or two clashing notes. So every project is absolutely different, but it has to come from a moment of aha, that the brain says this could be the seed that plants this piece. Mm-hmm. And from there, it's a matter of dealing with your own monsters inside, meaning that I want to go to some direction, but it's the piece is very capricious. Sometimes goes in different direction that you want to go. Experience gives you the knowledge to know when to force that or not. Sometimes if you force a piece to go towards where you want to go, it's in detriment of the piece. Sometimes you end up writing a piece that you didn't intend to. But if you really force it, you arrive at a piece that is not, it doesn't come from inside. It's just like when you turn a screw and it's not in the right path, it's just you're completely forcing it and it doesn't flow natural. So every piece you deal with different things, and that's why at this point in my career, I feel that I still don't know how to do it. I don't have a technique. I don't have a specific approach to the piece beyond something that triggers my imagination. And from there, I start imagining and trying. It's trial and error, being able to see if this particular approach works or not. And being honest with yourself and see like if the piece is communicating something or not.
That is your talent, right? If there were a formula, then anybody could do it. So it does grow out of your ability to do this, to focus it, to channel it, right? That's the beauty of it.
Possibly. I like to think so. And also because I don't know any other way to do it. For instance, the classical composer, the Baroque, there was a specific process to do it. It was much more standardized how they did the music. It was more common. The pieces themselves were more similar. There were not many variations. Mm. But then again, that's because I'm not really living in that age. Maybe there was a lot of differences in their brains of how they approach their concertos or their symphonies or their sonatas. From my perspective, it is completely different every piece, so I don't have a specific pattern of how I do it. Mm. You could call it talent, or you could call it that I still haven't figured it out.
I will call it talent.
Thank you.
And Mercedes?
Yeah, well, how I approach, well, it's very different actually for a performer. Well, with contemporary music, also every piece, because it's a different language, first of all, I take the piece and I have to understand the language. You know, what is that it's trying to tell me? I mean, there are parts that are very technical, like trying to understand the harmonies, the structure of the piece, how I'm going to work with the ensemble, you know, and the tempo changes, or what can be the difficult spots that I might have to work on. For studying a score, it's a quite complex thing as well, that it goes from the technical part to try to understand the concept and to try to understand the sonority, try to understand the phrasing of the piece, the direction, how is it creating more tension. So in the case of Agony and Ecstasy, so at the beginning, of course, it comes, nobody has ever heard the music. I didn't have any references, so I wanted to understand what he had written, what were the sonorities, what was the structure, how he had treated the instrumentation, the tempos, the transitions that he had written. And then in the first rehearsal, anyway, it's always a surprise, even if you've studied all of that, you go there and then you see, okay, well, this is even better. It sounds really great. I mean, in the case of Juan José, that was the case. The piece was it's really good. So I mean, in the first rehearsal, for instance, there were some technical things like he didn't want tempo changes between the transitions, and there were a few moments when the orchestra wanted to take the time. So we were trying to figure out those small details about what was written, how to bring it to life.
Let me ask a follow-up question on that, because it's so interesting. We talked about music as a language, and it is the language of musicians. And that's the technical part that you all agree on. That's the language that you all speak. And then you, as an ensemble, have to now communicate with this music, with each other, with the conductor, with the composer. And then all of a sudden it becomes really just human communication. What's more difficult, communicating with the music or human communication?
Well, I think human communication is definitely harder, for sure. Because also what the music says can be... music is very abstract. So what I interpret can be completely different from what someone else is interpreting, So, of course, at the end, you have to convince the musicians that your idea is the best idea. So that, of course, that has little to do with music often and more to do with human communication, for sure.
Yeah, but if we can make a comparison, for instance, there's people that are very experts at language and they use the same language all the time, like I would say the judges, the lawyers, and the judicial system. They are experts at words and definition of words and how they use the words, and they cannot agree on what a perfectly written sentence means. So, you have great experts, and half of them would say that this means that you could do this, or the other half would say that no, it means that you cannot do this. So if all those experts on something so tangible as language cannot agree, imagine that the communication with music, that is a completely abstract form of art, is completely dependent of the human interpretation. So that's why it becomes so rich in that sense. You have to work at it to make a sense of something that people ultimately they have to make sense for themselves, because that's the perception of the music is what I get from it, not what you say, but what they perceive.
Okay, and let me go a little bit more in depth. I love that comparison that even judges can't they can't agree on what one particular law says. They keep interpreting it. I love that comparison. But would you mind going back in that a little bit farther? So, for example, the piece that you mentioned, you were present. You had the opportunity, you had the luxury, right, of having the conductor right there with you rehearsing this piece. I know from theater, for example, that directors often, that's actually not something that's always welcome to have the writer, the playwright right there for rehearsals. It's
in music too, in music as well. They are not always.
So would you comment on? I'm thinking about one play where I was involved in Avignon in the rehearsals. That was with the playwright present. It was an absolute nightmare of getting the playwright to agree with the director and the actors. And so, how would you care to comment on that sort of? So who has then hierarchically, who makes the final decision, or how does it happen? I mean, from what I observed, you as a conductor, you're very, very kind to your musicians. You're very intent on making sure that you really are truly an ensemble, that everybody gets to say and communicate what they feel, and that you were very concerned about is this okay for everybody? Is there balance? Is there, are all the musicians, is this the satisfaction of the ensemble? But how does this happen? Who actually, if there is a disagreement or if there is a problem, how does it happen? How do you end up compromising or agreeing?
Well, at the end, it's the decision of the conductor. Generally, it is for practical reasons.
Normally, the composer, once you give the piece to the conductor, now you are not in control. You have to convey your indications to the conductor. I should not talk directly to the musicians. That is not my job. I have to communicate to the conductor what I intend. I have to talk to her before the music, or even if she asks me something during that process. But I cannot... I have not the power. I'm not the boss of the musician, they are not under my baton. So I cannot address the musician directly and tell them to do something, unless it's something technical like a F sharp or F natural, something is a possible mistake. Even though I created the music, I have no say once the conductor is conducting the music. At least is how I approach it. If I want to talk to the conductor, I talk to the conductor, but I'm not in charge of the rehearsal at all.
And for you, Mercedes, what has been so far the most challenging piece that you have served as a conductor for? From the point of view of the music, but maybe also from the point of view of communicating with the ensemble or the orchestra, and maybe even communicating with the public. What has been the most challenging piece so far in your career?
Well, from the point of view of music, I'm thinking of Milot, Le Canyon de Toi. So from the musical standpoint, that was so difficult. Every measure, a different tempo, a different meter. It was very difficult, extremely difficult. From the human point of view, I'm not sure. That has actually nothing to do with what music we do. Sometimes you are working with people that are going through difficult times, and that is, of course, that's difficult, for everyone. Even if they don't intend necessarily to make it difficult to other people, that is the result, right? I think that happens to everyone in every job. You are working with a lot of different people, and even if you have a very professional, very clear boundaries of those relationships, sometimes it's unavoidable that when someone is going through difficult times, they bring that also to the table, to the professional table, and that makes, of course, things more difficult. I don't know. I mean, I've conducted being sick sometimes, a few times. That happened to me actually with Sinfonietta in October. I had fever during my concert.
And this is an aspect, right, that we ignore as an audience. We are not at all aware of. For example, the evening at the Elbphilharmonie. Also, there were a lot of musicians who were not completely healthy and who were struggling with various colds and things.
Yeah, winter in Hamburg is hard for some of us. we get ill. Yeah.
Juan, I would like to go into two of your works a little bit more in depth, because I think they are something to reach towards with contemporary compositions.
Sure.
One is the ballet Sorolla. This is for me truly the epitome of cultural expression that can and should, that has to be brought to the attention and pleasure of everyone. I mean,
Thank you.
Swan Lake is great, and Giselle can be breathtaking, and then there's La Bayadère or Sleeping Beauty or the Nutcracker. But your ballet is a fresh breath of Spanish folklore. It is classical and pleasing, but it presents a Spanish painter whose works deserve attention. It goes into the many facets of Spain, of its costumes and dances and regional instruments. And to me, this is culture. This can and has to be savored, and it can enrich us so much. So would you mind telling us a little bit more about your experience with the ballet Sorolla and how it came about, and also how it has been received in Spain and in the rest of the world?
Yes, that was a wonderful, I would say, one of the most rewarding projects I've done, because not only because of the result itself, but also the repercussions that it had. This is based on some murals that are in New York in the Hispanic Society, that it was done by Sorolla at the very end of his life, even though he lived for 10 years, but that was really, it took a toll on his life because he had to travel a lot. So there's these huge 14 murals in New York, and each of one depicts different scenes of customs in Spain, in different regions. I was commissioned by National Ballet of Spain to write this ballet, and I did 10 of those 14 scenes. Not 12. And there was also a couple of the scenes were with Paco de Lucia, some music, some flamenco music, but pretty much like 85% of the ballet was with my music, with orchestral music. And it was very well received. It was almost 2 years touring in Spain. It went to Miami. It was very expensive to tour out of Spain with the ballet, so that's why it didn't go to too many places out of Spain. But the reception was really spectacular. The public really loved it, and as I say, it was 2 years pretty much stop touring Spain and some parts of some other places in. So I was very happy. And also the good thing about it is that the music itself is also performed in some orchestras, and it continues to be performed. In fact, this coming season is going to be performed in Valencia. So I'm very happy with this. Because normally contemporary music is performed on the day of the premiere, and then it just goes in perpetual forgetfulness. So I was very happy that this piece has that long life and still continues to have life.
Oh, I think this is one of the pieces that will continue, will go down in history. I mean, I'm not a musician, but in my humble opinion.
That ballet was the ballet itself. I'm not just talking about the music. The ballet, the whole show, it was magnetic. It was sublime, so beautiful. So the National Ballet of Spain is a national treasure. The amount of training these people have, the amount of techniques they have to know, the castanets, the heels, the taconeado, all these things they have to know, and they are coming from a classical school. So it's just, they are so richly trained. And then when you see them, all the repertoire they have with all these different regions of Spain, that ballet was so overwhelmingly beautiful. It was like 90 minutes of pure magic. So that's why it was completely sold out everywhere it went.
And that's one of the things that I enjoy about it so much, is that it is really pure culture. It educates audiences about, like I said, instruments and folk dances from Spain. So it concerns itself with this aspect of introducing Spain and presenting Spain. But it also mixes folklore with classical in the dance style, in the music. It introduces a painter. It's just magnificent. And the music, it's what you were saying. It is absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the very first opera that I saw was Tosca by Puccini. I was 8 years old, and I went with my godmother, who made a huge event out of it and she explained the music to me and the plot, and she made it all very exciting. And I have been an opera goer ever since. But I do have to say that I have grown somewhat weary of the programming of some of the major opera houses. I don't really want to see La Bohème again, and again, Tannhäuser, and La Traviata, and Carmen, and Madame Butterfly, and Juan. An opera like your El Pintor is so refreshing.
Oh, thanks.
Care to comment on that?
Well, without getting in trouble, I agree with you. Well,
I agree with both of you too. So I agree. I mean, that's with programming. Sometimes what I see, some orchestra or opera houses in the world, they say, well, we want to give the audience what they want. But actually, but if they knew other music not so well known, if they actually had access to that, I'm sure they would enjoy it as much, you know. So it's also our job to be educators, to educate, also to show. I agree with that. You know.
The problem is that sometimes contemporary is, well, I've seen contemporary compositions, especially for opera, but also for classical music. Oh, sometimes it's very difficult, especially as a non-musician, to appreciate it. But for example, that's why I bring up El Pintor as an opera and Sorolla as a ballet. It is possible to have amazing, pleasing, aesthetically beautiful, interesting. It is possible to do it with contemporary music. And I feel that has to be supported. Instead of, also with ballet, like I mentioned, these classical ballets, they're great, but we can continue. We cannot just rely on these well-known pieces. We can continue to have, we have to. Opera and ballet has to continue to develop and evolve. Otherwise, it will die out.
I agree. Actually, but that's also when you say contemporary, the problem is that that word has such negative connotations. And also, for most people, they actually don't know what that means. They don't know the diversity of languages that we have in contemporary art, in contemporary music. So they, for many people, I still talk with those who are not musicians, and even some musicians, they think contemporary music, they hear that and they think of the decaphonism or serialism, and they stopped there. They think that's it. That's contemporary music. And I say, no, but actually there is a lot more.
Well, and that's not contemporary, that's 100 years old.
Yeah, but if you say contemporary, that's what many people are going to think of. Sometimes I've had conversations and I said, okay, what do you think? What kind of music what composer do you think of? And they even tell me Schoenberg, So I say, well, but Schoenberg is not contemporary,
Yeah.
I can support this with, for example, with playwrights. So I really focused for my dissertation on, and I had to specify living authors because, when I said contemporary playwrights, everybody thought, like you said, well, okay, but they thought Camus, So, so I had to specify. No, I'm talking about contemporary authors, living authors.
Right. That is such a weird, for me, such a weird idea that we have as a society, right? Because I think if people really knew, they actually would like it.
I'm going to say this, and we'll see. If you want, I can cut it out, but my mother-in-law, so my husband's mother, plays piano. She's not a musician, but she's been playing all her life, and she's quite good. And so for Christmas, we gave her tickets to the Elfi to see Hauschka. And I wasn't really familiar with Hauschka's work, but when you're picking a present, I looked it up. I listened to some of his music on YouTube, quite enjoyed it. Thought, oh, this is beautiful. My mother-in-law will enjoy it. And we went to a concert that was completely experimental. He, and I believe it's his partner, but a percussionist, were playing piano and percussion. And it was completely, for me, I'm sorry, it was cacophony. It was experimental. I'm sure they had a lot of fun. I'm sure as musicians, it was great. He was putting a toilet paper roll on the piano, on the keys. He was putting a different tape. They were experimenting and having a great old time. Half the audience left. It was annoying. It was painful. It was nothing to enjoy unless maybe you were, as they say in German, vom Fach. If you were an expert musician and you could sit there and say, okay, this is how he is deconstructing music and this is how he's... But it was not, in my opinion, an enjoyable concert, and I don't think it did any good for promoting contemporary music. But again, if you want to comment, please comment. Or if you don't, that's okay. We can also cut out your comments, but let me know what you... Yeah.
Oh, I'm not. I'm too old to care now. Go ahead. You don't have to cut anything. I say it all. I say it all the time. My opinion that it's unbearable.
For me, I think also as a programmer, I think of how to bring different languages actually that make sense, that for the audience can be also interesting. I think maybe too much of one language could be overwhelming. I think, however, that some of the music might have something to say as well. I've performed all kind of aesthetics as well, and I think in the right context, it might actually make sense as well for the audience.
And I also, in that sense, I really like the programming that you did because it shows different aspects of living composers. Although there was one that was not living, but it was still a contemporary approach. And I think it was really, from an audience perspective, it was very enjoyable. It showed different things, but all of the aesthetics that you presented at the concert, they have some appeal to them. You might like one more than other, but there was some merit to them, and there was some enjoyment possible out of those pieces without being a torture. So I want to congratulate you because the programming was really, really on point.
And I absolutely agree with you. For example, the piece from Fabia Sankovsky is a difficult piece to enjoy as a non-musician. My point is, though, it fit into the programming. It showed the different aspects, the different types of compositions. And so that's where an audience can be educated. That's where an audience can learn with it. That's where an audience can remain interested also in pieces that are not as melodic or as pleasing or as easy. And so I think that is the key, for example.
And also, I would like to add, I don't mean that a piece of music has to be pleasing, has to be nice to listen to. Sometimes music has to be really annoying, but there has to be a sense why you do it, and there has to be a reward for it. Because sometimes you need to build, for instance, I'm just making it up, you have to build 20 minutes of tension and rough music, so that at the last minute, you bring out something and everything comes together and makes sense. It's like a rough movie that at the end is like where you need to present that, to put the audience in that mood so that you can tell your story. You can bring your own vision to that. So it doesn't have to be pleasing, but it has to have a purpose why you do that. And not all the music has to be nice. My music sometimes is really annoying, but there has to be a purpose why you do that.
Thank you for saying it. Exactly. I completely agree with you. It doesn't always have to be this la 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 melodic, I can sing along at all. But exactly, you said it perfectly, that it just has to it has to make sense. It has to have a point. It has to lead to something.
Yes, exactly. If you want to portray the horrors of a war or the horrors of a boss or something, you obviously you are not going to have Kenny G playing saxophone. But
actually, that connects to something. I was talking recently with a few composers as well about this. And when I go to contemporary music concerts, I try to listen for the discourse of the music, regardless of the aesthetic. I'm trying to listen and trying to understand what is the discourse, where is this taking me, what is the message? It's like a lecture. You're giving a lecture. What is the message you want to convey? What do you want them to understand of all these words? So with music, I try to also understand that. What are they trying to tell me? And one of the things, with several composers, I talk about that. A problem of contemporary music sometimes is not, for me personally, it's not about the language. Actually, I'm very open to different languages. I've conducted many different languages. I'm happy to do different things. But what I find actually the hardest is to find music that has a discourse that is taking me somewhere. I want to have an idea of what is the connection between those sounds. Mm-hmm. Why are you putting this sound next to the other sound in this particular duration or vertically connected to another sound? I mean, why are you doing that? It has to take me somewhere, right? There has to be a reason why you're doing that. Mm-hmm. And that is what sometimes I don't find. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to mention something that both of you do. I mean, you both try to reach young audiences as well. And Mercedes, while you were in the US, you were the conductor of Praecepta.
Yeah, that's an organization in the university. I conducted several operas there. Yeah.
You were the conductor of Praecepta that specifically promotes young American composers and presented, so to speak, shorter operatic pieces, right? And Juan, you have been known to organize soirées that bring people together. In LA, you did that as well. And I think you're doing that in Madrid as well. And to bring music to young people. Would you tell us a little bit about these initiatives?
Well, in my case, actually, Precepta is an organization that exists, and there was a chapter of that organization in my university where I did my doctorate, and every year they organized what they call micro operas. So young composers had to write short theatrical pieces. I conducted several of those short theatrical pieces from the students, and that was actually lots of fun. That was wonderful. I think for a young composer, it's a wonderful experience. And I think it works very well. Contemporary music, when it's connected to theater or to a story, I think it works very, very well. It was always very successful.
Yes, in Los Angeles, I did have these artistic soirees. And the main purpose was to bring audiences that were not very familiar with classical music to an environment where they can listen to a chamber, a duo or trio chamber music. Because sometimes I found out in Los Angeles that people were a little, it was too imposing to go to a concert hall, and for them, it was too imposing. They wouldn't go, they wouldn't know when to applaud, when to, I don't know, it was not an experience that they were looking for. So I thought to do this in my own home. I had a loft that it was open space, so I had a piano there, and I just invited people from the neighborhood, and then people, some friends that wanted to experience this. And it was a very casual way of presenting classical music to an audience that were not familiar with it. So that was my small contribution to the field of classical music.
And you're doing that in Madrid now as well, if I'm not mistaken.
In fact, I just did it last Saturday. I wasn't sure if I was going to continue with it because it's a lot. Even though it's your house, it's a production. You have to make sure that a lot of things well, and I was a little tired because I did it for 11 seasons there, for almost 10 concerts per season, so over 100 concerts at my home. But then I've been here for a year, and I wanted to try. Yeah, and I did that one last week, and it was very successful, and I will probably continue because I really like the experience, and people seem to enjoy it. Being so close to the musicians and everything, how they move a finger, how they tap their feet, or small details, how they turn their pages, everything so close, and it's so. Then with a glass of wine, and people talk to the musicians, and they have a really great experience. Because I also know that classical music, like everything else, is an experience. It depends. Not only on the concert itself, it happened to me. If I have a good disposition to a concert, I have a nice atmosphere, I have a nice conversation with somebody at the lobby, it predisposes me to have a better experience, and somehow I am more benevolent to what I hear at the concert hall. So it translates the whole experience influences how I perceive the music itself. So this concert, these soirees, are a good way of making sure that people have a good experience around classical music and they have a good recall of it.
Mm. And this is, if you look at it from sociological point of view, for my PhD, I looked at the sociological effects of theater on the community, and I used mainly the theories of Pierre Bourdieu. I don't know if you're familiar with the sociologist, but he talks about the different capitals, right? So we have financial capital, the money we have, etc. We have social capital, the people we know, but we also have this cultural capital, and this goes into exactly what you're talking about. People don't feel like they belong at the symphony. And so certain groups disclude certain activities, right? So it's also allowing the cultural capital of the different social milieus to mix, and that promotes peace and understanding and communication. So that's really interesting, and it's actually really, really admirable. And I'd like to go a little bit into sort of why I enjoy theater and the arts and opera and everything. And I grew up with theater, right? Because of my parents, because of my grandparents. My grandfather, for example, had a vineyard, and he made really nice wines, and he loved to share this with the so-called theater folks. He always invited the opera singers and the musicians and the ballet dancers to celebrate in his wine cellar. So I grew up personally knowing these artists, right? And and because of this, the theater and the opera gave my family first balcony seats, right? So we had like first balcony seats to whatever performance we wanted. And my father benefited from this as well, of course, due to his own personal charm, but partly to his father's connection. He then, had these relationships with the singers and the dancers and the actresses, and
in fact, people to share wine with.
Yeah. And there's like these personal connections. I mean, I'll never forget this. My father actually had a long love affair with one of the actresses, and I'll never forget this. I was a little kid, and during one of the performances, she turned to our balcony seats and she recited this whole tirade, this whole long monologue to my father, and then she collapsed dramatically, and she actually had to be carried off stage, and and I guess what I'm trying to say is that I had this special intimate connection to the arts. And because of that, I've always kind of sought this out. I mean, I loved being at the rehearsals at the Elfi for your concert. It's just so special, and to sit next to the composer. And I've always tried to give this to my children as well whenever possible. So I think I feel the performances more, and it's what you're talking about. I somehow get underneath the surface and can enjoy it more. So how can we promote that, and how can we create this type of experience in larger audiences?
That is actually, that's actually one of the missions of Sinfonietta, and that's one of my personal missions as well, actually. Yeah, we are not only entertainers, but also educators. That's my idea as well.
I think every organization deals with that. They are aware that they need to renew the audiences, their appeal to the audiences. So they have to keep reinventing, trying to see how they can approach new publics and how can they make it. So there is not a magic bullet of how you do that. We try to do it in many ways. Now organizations are doing it through social media, some of them more successful than others, but it's a constant search of what works or what doesn't work, and you have to work not only on your art, but also on how you bring people to your art. So in that sense, it's a constant work.
And it has to be genuine. It cannot be something, I'm just trying to sell tickets. It has to be a genuine desire to connect, right?
That's what I say, that some more successfully than others. You can see that they just hired a company to do social media campaign, and it's not organic. It doesn't go anywhere.
So in closing, I would really like to invite you just very quickly to also reach our Spanish-speaking listeners. Would you say a couple of words in Spanish, your message, your invitation to your concerts, to your music? Porque tengo muchos oyentes también que hablan español, y eso es algo que yo quiero hacer también, es no siempre promover el inglés, pero también guardar los otros idiomas. Y si les apetecería hacer así 2-3 comentarios en español, me gustaría muchísimo.
Claro.
Sí, claro. Para mí la música tiene un poder muy sanador, y creo que hemos perdido un poco esa conexión con la parte sanadora de la música y del arte. Y bueno, mi deseo sería que volviéramos a retomar que entendiéramos el arte también como algo muy sanador para el alma y bueno, para el ser humano, ¿no? Porque estamos totalmente conectados. Entonces, pues, ojalá que la gente se anime a conectar más consigo mismo, conectar con su parte también creativa, haciendo ellos mismos música, arte, asistiendo a espectáculos. Bueno, eso sería mi deseo, ¿no?
Bueno, yo creo en ese sentido que algo que es muy importante y que nos une mucho es el lenguaje. El lenguaje español, que como hablábamos al principio, tiene mucha conexión con la musicalidad. Esa musicalidad del lenguaje también creo que nos une en un concepto musical común. En ese aspecto yo creo que la gente que hablamos en español tenemos culturalmente unas raíces muy comunes y que estamos muy en contacto unos con otros y estamos muy cercanos culturalmente. En ese aspecto, pues por eso aquí se interpreta muchísima música de compositores latinoamericanos. Y de hecho en el concierto con Mercedes teníamos a Gabriela Ortiz, que está por todos sitios últimamente, la están interpretando por todo el mundo. Y yo creo que es un momento muy bueno para la cultura, en este caso los compositores latinoamericanos, y poder compartir ese espacio cultural que en tanto beneficio va a redundar para todos nosotros.
Juan and Mercedes, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. Thank you and
Thank you.
adios.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.